All right, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're still discussing the case of the Texarkana Moonlight murders, something that was suggested to us by one of our listeners, and as I mentioned in the first upload, that this was a case that is very new to me. In fact, like up until the week prior to this recording, I had not heard of it, but I was advised to look into it, and we found some very interesting things. The first thing I would say is when I was going through some of the material that is available on YouTube, it was actually quite difficult to find some kind of newer ideas about the case. This is one that takes us back to 1946, and it goes mostly from February of 1946 until May of that same year. And we're dealing with a kind of a series of murders totaling in five. Just reading some articles, so much of it is just the same. Like, so many people are just kind of repeating the same material that's on Wikipedia, and they're just kind of repeating the same sort of factoids about the case. So I'd really like to say that I found a YouTube channel from John Tennyson, who posted some very interesting discussions about the case, and it's actually challenging one of the major true crime books that was written about the case. And I thought that one of the ways that I could kind of explore this was looking at the prime suspects that they've listed. And the absolute largest prime suspect in this case is an individual named Youell Swinney, who we'll discuss today. But when we want to look at the stuff that I mentioned from that guy, John Tennyson, who brings in also another kind of contributor into some of his channel's uploads named Jeremy Kennington, they just get some very insightful kind of in short, they're trying to say that you can't instantly attribute these murders to kind of our prime suspect of the day, Youell Swinney. Swinney was a known habitual car thief in Texarkana, and when he was chased by a police officer and apprehended for car theft, he made a very bizarre line by saying that, will he get the chair? Is like, how much is he going to get 25 to life and stuff like that? And they're like, what are you talking about? We're only going to get, you'd only get 5 years at the most for stealing cars. And he says, you've got me for more than stealing cars. And people were beginning to think about the Texarkana murders. And before you jump to any conclusion about something as simple as that, my little nutshell version of Youell Swinney's bizarre statements, his wife, Peggy Swinney, confessed to the police that her husband was the murderer. The Texarkana Moonlight murders are something, and this is, part two of a kind of series that we're going to be doing on the case. So we covered a lot of things in part one, but just to sort of say that we had these series of five murders committed by someone always after sundown, wearing a kind of white hood or like a pillowcase that has two eye holes cut into it. It became the sort of inspiration for the film The Town That Dreaded Sundown. And a lot of eyes turned onto this guy, Youell Swinney, and a very big piece of evidence was the confession from his wife. And it's through this channel from John Tennyson, that I was able to find some things about how not only does the mainstream narrative go with that his wife confessed to Swinney being the murderer, she was also able to reveal very specific information about the case. And this is why I like kind of looking at some of the kind of larger sources that don't only just repeat the big facts, or they don't only just repeat things like reading off a list, point by point bullets. They actually kind of give some commentary, because Tennyson and Kennington, these guys I talked about, they challenged some things associated with the narrative, and they were like, Peggy Swinney, the wife of Youell Swinney, the prime suspect in the Texarkana Moonlight murders, she was interrogated by 12 different police officers, and she also had her lawyer keeping her up to date on the events of the case. So it's like she had enormous amounts of access to the kind of information that was going on. And it turned out she didn't reveal the critical pieces of information that would have cemented Youell Swinney's guilt until after she had been through multiple interrogations. And it seemed like, based on the kind of breakdown that they put, and I'll hopefully put a link to one particular presentation in the description box. It's like they're really trying to say that the interrogators and the lawyers were feeding her information, probably completely unbeknownst to them, not in any destructive way, and then she kind of went along with it. But a very big thing to say, and this is kind of a widely well accepted thing, is Peggy Swinney recanted her confession and she took it back that her husband was the murderer. She did not testify against him. They didn't have enough to hold him. And that's a very big point that Jeremy Kennington made. And when he was like, if they had certainty that Youell Swinney was the Phantom Killer, if he was the person involved with the Moonlight murders, he would have been arrested. This case would have been solved. Everybody would know 100% this guy did it. But that is not what is going on. It's not to say that it's impossible. My absolute first instinct that I had when I was reading about Peggy Swinney and Youell Swinney is that it has nothing to do with his habitual problem of car theft. It has nothing to do with the fact that there were like coincidences with the car theft, like with the car, I guess you'd say car robberies, grand theft auto, if you will, and the Moonlight murders, because there are some coincidences in the timeline. My absolute first instinct was this is the case of a woman who was feeling vengeful against her husband, who had some sort of dispute with her husband, and she responded in a very destructive way. And like trying to confessing to the police that her husband is a murderer, or very specifically, the he is the Phantom Killer. He is the Texarkana Moonlight murderer. He's the guy with the pillowcase on his head who is terrorizing the town of Texarkana back in 1946. That is kind of the first impression I got, that this was just a vengeful spouse who is kind of has a dispute with her husband and is trying to get rid of him. But when I began to examine this a little bit more, we also do have those lines from Youell Swinney saying that the police have him for more than just auto theft. They have him for more than just stealing cars. And it really, when he's talking about getting 25 to life, doesn't that sound like he actually did commit some sort of crime? It actually does sound like he committed something serious. I mean, murder, rape, arson, or something horrendous. But how does that specifically mean that he was the Moonlight murderer, the Phantom Killer? How does that specifically tie him to the Moonlight murders? I mean, that's a very, very general statement. You've got me for more than stealing cars. How does that really establish that he was the only perpetrator in this? A big thing that we need to know with this is Youell Swinney never confessed. His wife tried to pin him as the murderer. He never confessed to it, and like that's one of the things that where they're just like, it doesn't support the narrative. I mean, he's saying these things to the police. You've got me for more than stealing cars. He's going to get the electric chair, and he's afraid of that, right? But then he's saying, no, but I'm not the murderer. I mean, that really tells me that, like, the kind of message that is trying to be conveyed is he did something very heinous. Well, it could have been another serious crime. How do we know specifically that is tied to the Moonlight murders? And the short answer is we don't. And that was another thing that I heard in Jeremy Kennington's presentation when he's like, not saying that it's impossible, it's just like it could be. It's just you can't make the definitive conclusion based on the evidence that you have that Youell Swinney is the murderer. And that was absolutely my first instinct. I was just like, when I was just reading about Peggy Swinney, it was almost just like I didn't feel that she was very credible or trustworthy. And it really felt like she was trying to pin her husband for something, regardless of whether he did it or not. She just wanted to maybe get him out of her life. Or once again, I really had that gut instinct that this was a vengeful act because of a certain dispute. But I don't hear the specific things associated with the Moonlight murders in Youell Swinney's statement that that he had is going to get the electric chair. He's going to get 25 to life. Like, what about the other possible crimes that he could have committed? So, I mean, those are going to be the things that we're going to be kind of exploring over the course of the next couple days or weeks. I mean, I definitely got pulled into this one. In the first part of the podcast, I would say that we talked about how there are enormous parallels between the Moonlight murders and the Zodiac killer. And someone even left a comment on the first upload saying that, is it possible that the Zodiac killer is the son of the Moonlight murderer? Because they sound enormously similar. But at once, when we look at something like the Zodiac killer, one of the big things we do is we often looked at the suspects first, and then we kind of start attributing things to them. And I think that that could easily happen with the Moonlight murders, where it would be like, it almost like people try to force their theory by, they start with this person and then they try to find reasons why this person is the Zodiac killer, or this person is the Phantom killer. So that's one of the things that I hope we can avoid too much. But I would just have to say, my initial feelings about this, as someone who's a complete outsider to the Texarkana Moonlight murders, who had never heard of it before 7 or 8 days ago, I was just saying that my immediate first instinct was that Youell Swinney was not the murderer. If I saw any sort of definitive evidence or any sort of certainty, any sort of completely damning evidence that is beyond a reasonable doubt, I would be like, yes, absolutely. Because once again, it's not about, sticking to your story. It's not about sticking to your narrative. It's not about the theory that you like the most. It's about what actually happened. But I do have to say, though, that even though I kind of have the gut instinct that he is not the killer, there are some other sort of pieces of evidence that I found were rather coincidental. I mean, some he apparently had some sort of, I forget the exact thing that it was, but he's sort of like some sort of material that they were able to tie to one of the final victims. He had some sort of particles or some sort of debris that was from Virgil Stark's shop. Remember, I said that there were 5 murders, right? Virgil Stark, Virgil Starks, Starks, was the final victim in the final confirmed murder, and I believe he shot Virgil Stark's wife twice, but she was able to survive the killings. And Virgil Starks was, of course, shot while he was listening to a radio program in his chair. And that is the one where the Phantom Killer broke from the pattern of targeting younger individuals, targeting the lovers' lanes, and he attacked, some older people who are in their own home. This isn't going after someone in their car. And that's another parallel we mentioned with the Zodiac Killer, with the final confirmed incident breaking from the pattern, because the Zodiac broke from targeting lovers' lanes and, of course, killed Paul Stein, the taxi driver. What I sort of get the feeling of when I look at a person like Youell Swinney is that this reminds me very much of Richard Gaikowski, one of the prime suspects in the Zodiac murders. And with the Zodiac Killer, Richard Gaikowski is someone who has an enormous amount of coincidences around him, where it's like they say that there was no Zodiac activity on a Wednesday or Thursday night. I forget the exact day, but one of the days of the week has no Zodiac activity because Gaikowski was a newspaper editor and it was his deadline. And they also say things like he left the newspaper and started working in a movie theater in the 70s, and the Zodiac referenced contemporary film. I mean, just things that could be purely coincidental. And the biggest one with Gaikowski is that the Zodiac mailed 3 letters for the first time, and then Gaikowski's newspaper, The Good Times, was then folded into thirds when it was normally folded in half. And it's like coincidence, coincidence, coincidence. Is there a connection there? Or are these just completely unrelated incidences that people are kind of just sort of cherry picking to get a desired result? Are they just trying to force the theory? And that's something that I read about things when it was like on a different suspect, but someone wrote that about the Zodiac Killer. It's like you're trying to force a square peg through a circular hole. Is that what's going on with Youell Swinney? Cherry picking to get a desired result, forcing a theory, accepting that there is something behind these very vague statements that may or may not be related. I mean, it does seem like he was definitively on Virgil Stark's property at some point, but I don't know. Texarkana, 1946. Is that unreasonable? Like, I mean, people interact in a town. I mean, people have interactions there, and even if he was, on someone's property, it's like we would have to have a definitive certainty that this was not associated with anything other than the Moonlight murders. It's like just because you visited someone's shop for something, that doesn't make you a murderer. But at the same time, it's like I would keep an open mind to the evidence, and I'm going to explore the sort of kind of more in depth things that were kind of posted by John Tennyson and Jeremy Kennington, and we'll also talk about that sort of mainstream book that I mentioned. But it really seems like when they try to pin Youell Swinney on this, it seems like once again they're just kind of trying to force a particular theory on a person. And I'm an outsider to this. This isn't really some case that I've kind of, had a chance to think about for months or something like that. And one of my big problems is though it's like I end up just kind of trying to not exactly overthink things, but I just keep trying to reshape the theories. And like, so if you don't really take in too much new information, you just sort of get the tunnel vision where you're like you keep trying to think about your own theory and sort of in a new way, but you neglect all of the potential outside information that could be so beneficial to you. So I'm hoping that I'm going to spend some more time with this case, and we're going to be talking about a few more suspects. I would say that it still is possible that Youell Swinney has some connection to this, or that, but really just have the overwhelming feeling that he probably did something else majorly illegal, not associated with auto, because he made those statements about I'm going to get the electric chair, 25 to life. It does not necessarily mean that he committed the Moonlight murders. There are a plethora of other illegal things that he could have done. Not to mention, it seems like he was on. Okay, so there's a very days, and we're gonna have just kind of like a breakdown of some of the suspects and the likelihood. And the issue that I was kind of dealing with, that I was kind of like trying not to say at the beginning, was that Peggy Swinney might have had the situation exacerbated by the police. What do I mean by that? I really didn't want to say it because I'm not certain about it, but it almost seemed like that they were, perhaps some of them were trying to pin this on Youell Swinney, and that her interrogations, like, once again, 12 different interrogators, they might have been sort of pushing it in a certain direction. They might have been trying to kind of, once again, force the desired outcome. It's like with something like that, I'd have to really investigate a little more before I could kind of say that beyond the shadow of a doubt. But at this point, I would just kind of say we're going to look more into this and see what's going on. But I had to kind of give, the first initial feelings is that I don't feel very strongly that Youell Swinney is like this overwhelming prime suspect that they're making him out to be. What this seems like to me is, once again, I said it many times, it seems like his wife was trying to kind of resolve a dispute with him in a destructive way by pinning the murders on him, and also possibly maybe he did actually commit a very heinous crime that could have been murder, because there's a line in there when they're like, we got your husband for murder, and she said, how did you know? But then again, that's just murder. That doesn't say the Moonlight murders. Well, we're going to have a little bit of a discussion. Sorry about the stream getting interrupted for a little while. I think part of the podcast might be a little bit lost. But anyway, thank you so much to anyone who's made it this far in, and I hope we can have a kind of bigger discussion on the Moonlight murders over the next couple days. And thank you so much for listening. Talk to you soon.